Hi everyone, I'm Matt.
I'm Mitch.
I'm Saioa.
I'm Luke, and we did our presentation on the Ford company.
So I'll start off a little background about the founder and the owner of Ford, Henry Ford. I start off with a quote: "Failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently." We feel that this quote fits really, really great with Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford as a person, because even though he was one of the most influential and successful industrialists in the automobile industry, he still experienced hardship, and he still experienced two companies dissolve before obviously the third successful company of the Ford Motor Company. The first two that dissolved were the Detroit Motor Company, which is now known as Dodge, and the Henry Ford Company, which is now known as Cadillac. Obviously the third time was a charm for Henry Ford, because they were later incorporated in 1903, the Ford Motor Company. We'll start with a little background about them. During their first year in 1903, they were immediately popular in the United States market, immediately popular and profitable. They reached $37,000 in profits just by October 1st. Their product was initially a luxury good in the market because of the high price of the car due to the high cost, but this later changed after the inception of the assembly line. Ford continued steady growth. Market started to become more competitive, and they really needed a spark, and they found this spark in 1908 with the Ford Model T. A little bit of background about the Ford Model T. It really revolutionized the automobile industry. They utilized components made from other companies, such as Local Tool and Die. They used various parts. They also had a sponsorship and a partnership with Firestone Tires. They were industry leading. Ford was the leading name in the industry in 1906, and that was simply with just over 8,000 units produced. Then they started to introduce methods such as the assembly line. They started to introduce smaller aspects of it before that became a thing in 1913. It raised production exponentially. As you can see, the production jumped from 8,729 units in 1906 to 170,000 in 1912. And the thing about this number is those 170,000 were simply Model Ts. Ford also produced higher, more luxurious models. They produced the Model A, and there were various other ones like the Thunderbird. As far as the assembly line goes, it changed not only the automobile industry, but the manufacturing industry as a whole. It utilized work specialization and shifted production from labor-intensive to capital-intensive in order to increase production and cut costs. This cut down production time, just from Ford's end, from just over 13 hours for one unit to only an hour and a half per unit. This drop in cost obviously meant a drop in price to the consumer, which was great for Ford and their profit margins and just as a business as a whole. And allowed Americans in the middle class to afford an automobile. From 1908 to 1927, Ford produced more than 15 million Model Ts. And just to wrap your head around how much 15 Model Ts really is, we have the Ford Model T, the Volkswagen Beetle, and the Toyota Corolla. And from 1938 to 2003, they produced only 5 million more in about 3 times the time that Ford did in just 19 years. And also with the Corolla, they produced in just over 50 years, 40 million units, as opposed to 19 years with Ford's 16 million.
Okay, so as Matt mentioned, the introduction of the assembly line would not just change things for Ford, but also for the manufacturing industry as a whole. It reduced the marginal cost of no matter what you're producing. Of course, we know Ford were producing a Model T. This increased their profitability. They were in turn allowed to reduce the price of these Model Ts, and even more so than as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, they were able to offer these automobiles to more and more people in the growing American market. They were also able to produce at a higher isoquant line because they're producing a lot more Model Ts than they had been before with the introduction of the assembly line, and both capital and labour became a lot more productive under the use of the assembly line. So one thing Henry Ford did was he focused on workers' conditions, and this is revolutionary, especially coming off the back of some very, very hard working conditions for labourers in the 1800s. He doubled wages of the lowest paid employee in his company up to $5 a day, which is an awful amount of money for an unskilled worker at the time. He shortened the working day from 9 hours to 8 hours, which is also revolutionary. And this is something that employers are still doing now in the business world. It has a number of purposes. making work conditions better. It keeps employees happier, of course, that's obvious. It helps them to improve their productivity. Probably the main thing is it maintains workers, and it's very, very important in manufacturing industries, because every time you get in a new worker, they're going to need to be trained. But if you can maintain that worker that you've trained, that's the one time you're going to pay those training costs, and it's going to save you money in the long run. Also, by paying these higher wages, you can attract better workers who are, of course, going to be a lot more productive as well. So Ford eventually outgrew the American market in the early 1900s with the introduction of the Model T in the assembly line, and quickly needed to expand. Ford Europe was founded in 1957 when Ford Britain and Ford Germany merged. Ford India was founded in 1998, and these expansions allowed Ford to operate at their minimum efficiency scale. They found that obviously at a very, very high scale. That's going to become important when we talk about the oligopolistic market later on. They operated at a very, very large scale, making it very hard for other competitors to enter the motor industry. So this is where they reached here, the minimum efficiency scale, the lowest point of long run average costs. They benefit from all these economies of scale down here. This would have been their short run average cost after the assembly line, and by expanding into the world market, they of course managed to get bigger and achieve this point here. So that in turn, as more and more companies in the oligopolistic motor industry got bigger, they experienced, like I said, those economies of scale, which were good for those companies, but acted as barriers to entry for other companies trying to get in on the profits. They weren't able to do so. Another thing that became important in the motor industry was product differentiation. And that's one thing that Ford really excelled at. In the 1980s, they ran their campaign, "Have you driven a Ford lately?" And that will go down in marketing history as one of the most successful campaigns, especially in the motor industry. So in the 1990s, at the start at least, Ford continued this progress, this forward progress of making high profits. At the time, that was due to thriving stock markets and low prices. And that wasn't just benefiting Ford, it was also benefiting their competitors. Their competitors actually managed to make better use of these factors, and they started to take some of Ford's market share away from them. Companies in the Asian market like Mazda and Toyota, Suzuki, they had very, very cheap labor out there, and that was a competitive advantage they had over Ford. So by the end of the 21st century, Ford had lost an awful lot of their market share and found themselves in a really, really tough situation.
So even though Ford's beginning was really successful, in 2006 the sales started to go down as well as profits, and that way it was almost near bankruptcy, as we can see right here. It was not only the only company that was close to bankruptcy. Other competitors such as GM were having like a hard time too. So one of the main causes for this economic loss, it was that the price of gasoline went up. So the price of gasoline and the demand of cars have a negative relationship, which means they are close complements. And since as the price of gasoline went up, the demand for cars went down, and that way the sales in Ford cars went down. So because of this, Ford tried to recover from this economic downturn, and Alan Mulally, the CEO of Ford Company, and took the business in 2006 and tried to adjust new plans. For instance, it created the One Ford plan in order to recover, and its goal was to maximize profits. So that way, it tried to charge this price and produce this quantity, because it's where marginal revenues equal marginal cost, and that's the profit maximization condition. So one of the strategies it implemented was to reduce costs. So by reducing, for instance, the price of labor, and one of the things it did was to remove labor, and it also shut down some facility plants, and that way the average total cost went down. The average total cost, it's the sum of the average variable cost and the average fixed cost, which is actually the labor and the facility plants. And this way, the cost of production went down, and that way the profits went up. So this led to shift the ISO cost line to the left. So Ford also tried to expand globally. That way it will increase sales as well as profits. And this way the transportation costs and the shipping costs will go down. Actually, right now, there are 110 manufacturing plants all over the world. And it's also trying to expand to cities like Morocco, for instance. So right now, Ford is trying to be unique, and in order to increase sales, it's trying to produce new models. In 2009, for instance, it produced Ford Fiesta. In 2011, it produced Focus Electric, and this is the first all-electric car. It actually provides wireless connectivity, which is a pretty big deal. And also, it produced new models by focusing on the size, new designs, and an example of this is the Transit Connect van, which actually can fit 7 passengers. All these models were adjusted with new products. For instance, the hydrogen fuel V10 engine. This is a pretty big deal. It's one of the best engines in the world. Also, the Sony branded audio systems. And all these little things were actually huge because it increased the sales and it made the products of Ford very unique. So, because of these unique products, the available substitutes went down, and that way the demand of price of Ford products became more inelastic. That way, because of this inelasticity, Ford could charge a higher price, and that way the revenues will go up as well as profits. So we can see here that the demand curve shift to the right, and Ford that way could charge a higher price and also produce a higher quantity, increasing profits.
Ford really decided to focus on the changing demographics. In doing this, Ford decided to focus on the middle class. This will increase the demand for automobiles in general. Obviously, cities will continue to grow. By 2030, there will be 41 cities with greater than 10 million people. This will increase demand for smaller models. Ford wants to be a forerunner when it comes to focusing on the environment. The motor industry in general needs to reduce pollution and dependence on fossil fuels. Ford wants to take the initiative in leading the charge. Our society is really starting to make strides toward becoming more environmentally friendly. The product needs to change with the demands of the consumers. With these factors considered, Ford has embarked on projects to keep their vehicle unique and different to the competition. This is essential in the oligopolistic market that is getting more and more competitive. From curve control to EcoBoost engines, Ford is continuing to be more initiative. This is key for the success in the market due to the rising consumer expectations negligence. If they continue to be innovative, not only will there be success, but this will also increase the product into the future. Thank you very much for listening, and are there any questions?